Lovely. I'll just wait for a few more people to join. I think that's everyone for now. Um, as you might have just heard, we are recording this session, so you're more than welcome to have your camera on if you'd like, or if you're more comfortable with it turned off, that's absolutely fine. So welcome, thank you so much for joining. This is the CEP Innovate Health, the Foundation series, which is a webinar series. This is the third in a series of 4. And the purpose of this series is just to give you a bit of an insight into innovation in the context of healthcare. If for those of you who are looking to develop an innovative idea, hopefully it's giving you some inspiration. And those who already have an idea, hopefully it will just give you a few pointers as to how to develop it further. So we have had 2 sessions already. They have also been recorded, and in the next week or so, we will be uploading all the recordings to our website. So if you wish to catch up on them, you're welcome to do so. Our previous sessions have focused on sort of what innovation can look like, so the different types of innovation, who an innovator can be, and we've got people joining these calls from all different professional backgrounds, which is brilliant. We've also looked at sort of NHS priorities, so some key areas where you might look to develop innovation. And we've also looked at identifying a problem, really trying to understand it, getting to grips with it and doing some research around it as well. So this particular session is focused on Lean Canvas. So hopefully it will give you the opportunity to develop and refine your idea a bit further. And we are joined by a few different team members on the call. Harry Thurkettle. Harry, if you're happy, just say hello. I know you'll do a proper introduction in a moment.
Yeah, hi everyone. Looking forward to doing the session. I'll do my intro and my slides if that's okay, Jenny.
Thank you. So Harry will be sort of leading a Lean Canvas exercise and giving you a bit of an insight into Lean startup principles. We also have Tamsin Holland-Brown on the call. If you could just unmute for a moment, thank you.
Hi, my name's Tamsin. I work as a paediatrician in the NHS for coming up for 25 years, based in Cambridge, but I've now got a role as co-clinical lead on the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme. So I actually had applied to the programme and with a device and an app, and then later had joined the delivery team.
Thanks, Tamsin. Thank you. And Lucy?
Evening, everybody. My name is Lucy Dentis. I'm Programme Manager for the NHS CEP and the Patient Programme and also the Dementia Innovators Programme. So great to have you here. Thanks.
Lovely, thank you. I'll just stop sharing and in a moment I'll pass over to Harry. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write them in the chat. There'll be the opportunity to ask questions at the end and possibly a few questions during the session as well. But if that's okay, Harry, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. So let me try and share my screen. Share this. Hopefully this is going to work. Second, I've lost you all. That's it. Can you guys see that okay? Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, welcome everyone to the session. So quickly I'll do my introduction and then we'll get stuck straight into it. So I'm Harry, similarly to Tamsin, doctor by background, although I got excited by digital health and jumped ship into the big bad world of entrepreneurship about 10 years ago now. Was one of the year 1 clinical entrepreneurs. So I've been around the program now for, is it 9 years? It's starting to show my age, I think. But yes, initially on the program as one of the clinical entrepreneurs and then transitioned to kind of a mentor role, and I've helped out with some kind of business planning sessions and running some of these workshops. Done a variety of things in digital health startups. I worked with a company called MyMHealth for a few years, and they make apps which help people look after themselves better, otherwise known as digital therapeutics. So they've absolutely helped people look after COPD and asthma and diabetes and other things. So I was involved in rolling those out across the NHS. And so we took them from around 1,000 users up to over 100,000, and also built my own app on their platform, which is a prehabilitation app. So helping people get ready for surgery. So took that from idea stage right through to market and getting people onto the app. But for the last 3 years or so, I've been working as a Director of Health and Innovation at a company called AirLogic, which is the UK's largest specialist health tech consultancy. So we will build lots of the big national systems for the NHS, so things like the spine and electronic prescribing and other big important systems. And I look after a bit of our internal operations team, so I look after how we operate, how we do business, and as well as doing some business development and strategy and other bits and pieces for them. So quite a wide background in digital health, everything from product design and running the business, marketing, sales, business development, and generally getting into mischief. So hopefully got a bit of insight and experience to share it with you all tonight. But there's enough of me talking about me. Let's get into the good stuff. So we're going to spend the session looking at the lean canvas. And if hopefully, there we go, it's working. This is what we're going to go through. So I've done my introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about lean startup principles. Where does that come from? What does lean startup even mean? And then we'll go into the lean canvas, which is a one-page business model, which gets your idea from, oh, I think there's something cool which I could do, which could maybe solve this problem. And it takes it to thinking more holistically about your entire business. So rather than just rather than getting stuck thinking about your solution, getting really excited about that, you start thinking about things like, well, who am I solving this problem for, and how am I going to reach them, and what are the costs going to be, and so on and so forth. So we'll give you a bit of an overview of that and some tips, and then we're going to, during the session, go through and get you to write your own one-page business plan, your first lean canvas. And then we can spend some time discussing that, and got plenty of time at the end for kind of Q&A and stuff as well. So let's get stuck into the good stuff. So lean methodology, hopefully many of you will have heard this, but I know we've got a range of different backgrounds on the call. So I'll presume some people, it may be a new concept, but lean started off with the car company Toyota. And back in the post-war era, they were essentially on the brink of bankruptcy. They're getting outcompeted by a load of big American manufacturers. And they then developed this lean methodology, which was focused on reducing waste and becoming more efficient at their business, which was, of course, producing cars. And by adopting and implementing these lean methodologies, they went from brink of bankruptcy to being the most successful car company on the planet. Since then, lean methodologies have been adapted and adopted across a whole bunch of different industries. And in the early 2000s, there was a guy called Eric Ries who decided to try and apply those principles to running a startup. So what's the biggest waste in running a startup? Well, spending time, money, or effort building anything that your customers don't want and isn't adding value, right? Because you've only got very finite resource, you've got to really rapidly get to the point where you've got something that your customers want. So what Eric Ries tried to do was to sort of codify a lean startup approach, which is a systematic, I guess, quasi-scientific method as to how to focus on the most important things for your customer and how to spend your time and effort building things that people actually want and need. And then the other book, which you see on the right there, is Running Lean by Ash Moira, who took all of the principles and teachings in the Lean Startup and put it into a real step-by-step, play-by-play guide of to how do you actually implement these things into running a business. And it was Ash Moira who actually developed the Lean Canvas, which we'll be using today. So anyone who's interested in innovation in general, I think these are two must-read books. I think there's no magic wand or secret recipe for running a startup, but there are approaches and methods which can increase your chances of success. And I think Lean Startup is definitely one of those approaches and methods. And it's a really good starting point for innovators across any sector. But I think particularly in healthcare, it could be really useful because we all know innovating in healthcare can be challenging. It's obviously a highly regulated environment. It can be a difficult place to innovate in. So having a structured and semi-scientific approach that you're using, I think can really tip the odds in your favor. So that's lean principles at a really high level. And now to go into a little bit more detail. So it's a little bit of a busy slide, but hopefully it'll give you a bit of an overview of lean startup methodology and how you can apply it. So if you start at the top left, the most important thing is to find a problem worth solving, right? Too often, I think I see entrepreneurs who come on the program or elsewhere, and they have thought of a really cool solution, and now they're going around trying to find a problem that they can solve with it. Whereas what you need to do is you need to start with the problem first, right? And I think as particularly, I know many of you on the call likely to be clinicians or healthcare professionals. I think one of your key strengths within that is having a deep understanding of real world problems, right? Understand, you've been there, you've seen it, you've seen the issues that you face, you've seen the issues that your patients face. You have that deep understanding of and lived experience of a problem. So that's a real key strength. But so always be problem led, always start with a problem. Then you can get into the exciting bit. You can start thinking about designing the solution. How could I solve this problem? But then the next most important step is to get that idea out of your head and get it into some kind of business model that you can test. And that's where the lean canvas comes in. So quick 1-page business plan. So it's not the 1990s, we have to write a 60-page business plan with lots of graphs and lots of effort put into it, when the only thing in a 60-page business plan that you can be sure about is it's wrong. And it's probably out of date by the time you finish writing it. So it's not about doing something really laborious and doing busy work for the sake of it. It's about conceptually being able to think holistically about your business. So it's not just a shiny solution. You start to think about it in terms of who you're solving the problem for, what your costs are going to be, how you're going to reach your customers, what are the key things you need to look at, and so on. So once you've done that and you've got your business plan out, you've got to then look at it, and this is where the kind of quasi-scientific bit of the approach comes in. Try and look at it and work out where are your biggest risks, where are your biggest assumptions that you've made in your business model. Now, typically, when you're starting out, that's going to be in and around the problem that you're solving and the people that you're solving it for, right? Maybe with a little bit of the solution that you're proposing. So are you sure that you've really understood the problem? Are you sure you've understood who your customer is? And are you sure that you've got a solution that's actually going to solve that problem for that customer? So to look at your business plan and identify where the biggest risks are, and then this is where it's semi-scientific, try and run some experiments to test those assumptions, right? So you can look at your business plan, you can come up with a hypothesis that if I build this type of solution, it's going to solve this problem for this group of people, right? So that's an assumption hypothesis that you can test. And so you build a minimum viable product, loosely defined as the simplest thing that you can do to test your biggest assumption. I think that's a good way to think about an MVP. Then the important bit is to get out of the building and go and test that with customers. So I don't just sit there writing business plans and spending loads of time investing loads of effort into building a solution without testing it and getting out there and trying to get some real world validation. And then once you've done your tests, analyze your feedback, and then you can go back to your business plan. So what did you learn from that experiment? Did you validate or invalidate your assumption? Now, if it's completely wrong and you need to go back to the drawing board, that's fine. You need to maybe pivot and try and solve a different problem, or maybe target a different group of customers. If it's almost there and you validated your assumption, you can go to your next riskiest assumption and test that and go around that build, measure, learn loop again. And eventually, once you've been around that cycle enough times, then you are ready to go and actually build your product and then kind of take it to market. And you can see, final thing on this slide is these kind of key milestones or key phases that you see most businesses go through. So at the bottom left, you've got problem to solution fit. So that's your first key milestone. Have you really understood the problem, and have you shown that you've got a solution that can solve that problem? And then once you've got that, the next phase, the next key milestone you want to get to is product market fit, which is when you've got a list. Imagine you've got a queue of customers lining up, they're all knocking at your door and they're desperate to get access to your solution. And then once you've got that, that's the secret sauce. That's when you can really accelerate your growth, right? You've proven that you've got a viable solution, you've proven that you've got a viable business model and people want it, and then you're ready to scale, really build a successful business. So that's the overview of lean startup methodology. So hopefully lots of information, but hopefully gives you a little bit of big picture view, a little bit of context. But what we're going to spend time on today is looking at the lean canvas, which you can see on screen. And so this is that one-page business plan. Numbers in the boxes are the suggested order that you should fill it out. So you start off with your problem, then start thinking about your customers. And two things to say there. So problem, you really should be trying, if you can, to find a must-have problem to solve. So not just a nice to have, which people don't really care about, but something that people is massively important to them, that they're able to solve that problem. At the bottom of that box as well, it's good to write out existing alternatives, which is how is that problem being solved today, right? And most must-have problems in this day and age have some kind of solution, but that solution could be, for example, a cobbled together series of spreadsheets which don't work massively effectively. It could be something which is clunky or slow or expensive, but by understanding the problem and the existing alternatives, that creates the platform for you as an entrepreneur or as an innovator to think about how can I solve this problem in a new and better way, how I'm going to be better than existing alternatives. Once you've bottomed that out, and kind of at the same time, you want to start thinking about, well, who is suffering this problem, right? Who are the people who are really feeling the pain of this problem? And that's your customers. I think it's good to divide this into two sections. So you've got your customers, who are the people who pay for your product, and you've got your users, who people who use your product. Now they can be the same, but often in healthcare they're different. So it may be that you plan to sell your product to a hospital, for example. So your customer could be the chief financial officer at a hospital, but your user might be a healthcare professional, or it might be a patient who actually uses it. And one of the challenges within healthcare innovation is you often have to solve problems for both of those groups, right? So you have to be able to solve problems for your customers. And if that's your CFO, then their problems are often money related, right? How are you going to therefore give them year in cash savings, right? How are you going to be able to free up some budget for them and give them, rapid return on investment? The problems that your users might be facing, so your clinicians or your patients might be facing, might be entirely different, right? They may be worried about having an operation or a procedure. They may be frustrated by their existing way of solving their problems because it's too slow and it's clunky and it's double keying and all the rest of it. But mapping out your target customers as well as your target users, and then thinking about how to solve both of their problems, I think is really important. Some of the other boxes, unique value proposition, I think it's always a tricky box, particularly when you're early on, to fill out. But think about this as in if you've got a website with a landing page, you've usually got about 8 seconds to capture somebody's attention when they land on your website before they bounce and they go off and do something else. So how can you communicate what you do in 1 or 2 sentences, which makes it very clear to your target customers why they should pay attention to you, why you're different from the competition. The solution box, set up box 4 is it's by design intentionally the smallest box on the lean canvas, and that's because entrepreneurs and innovators love to get stuck in the solution box, and they think, oh well, if it could do this, if it could do that, then it could do this other thing, and you have all of these bells and whistles. If I build all of that, then people will come. Whereas actually, you should be laser focused on what are the top 1 to 3 things that your solution needs to be able to do in order to solve your problem for your target customers. So keep it short and sweet and to the point, particularly at an early stage. Ideally, if you can get that down to 1 thing that your solution does really well, I think that puts you in good stead. And then the other bits of the model, I won't spend too long talking about these, but just so you get the full picture. So channels, your path to your customers, how are you going to go and find your first customers, and how are you going to communicate what you're doing to them. So that could be, for example, doing online advertising. It could be going and doing some cold calling. It could be going and knocking on people's doors. But how are you actually going to go and find people who might be interested in your innovation and speak to them? The 2 bottom boxes, revenue streams and costs, right? So how are you going to make money, and how much are you going? How are you going to? What are your costs going to be in order to deliver your solution? Worth saying, I've kind of framed this as, if we're talking about commercial business, I think there's a lot of this which is directly transferable into not-for-profits or social enterprises or other kind of innovations as well. You're still going to have to solve problems for people. You're still going to have to find some way of funding sustainably your initiative, even if it is not a for-profit startup. So I'll keep on talking about it as if we're talking about a for-profit commercial entity, but I think most of the principles which I'm talking transfer pretty well across to charities or other not-for-profit innovations as well. And then final 2 boxes, key metrics. What are the key numbers which tell you whether you're heading in the right direction? And then unfair advantage, often the most difficult box to fill out, particularly at an early stage. But how can you, what's your unique differentiator, which is difficult to be copied or bought by a competitor? So it's a quick whistle-stop tour of the lean canvas. And in a second, we're going to get each of you to try and take your idea and write out your own lean canvas. We're going to go through that in a structured way. But before we do that, I just wanted to share a few high-level tips. First one, it should be a quick exercise, right? So it should never take you more than 30 minutes to fill out a lean canvas. If it does, and if you're really agonizing over a point, it probably means that there's a gap in your knowledge, right? And that's maybe where you might show you where your biggest risk is, right? So if you get stuck, you should move on. And really the aim of what you're trying to do is to find the right questions which you need to ask with your experiments and with your testing that you're going to go out and do. Customers versus users I've talked about already, right? But I'd say critical to understand those 2 groups. And if you build something which solves problems for your users, but you've forgotten about your customers, then you're going to struggle to make that a success, right? So you need to consider both of those groups. 4th, get out of the door and go and present it to someone. Really important, right? I think particularly early stage entrepreneurs and innovators are often really worried about this, and they're often worried about people laughing at them or saying that their idea is not great, or worried about people stealing their idea and going off and taking it and doing it themselves. Obviously you don't want to, if you have some patented technology or some real secret sauce, you don't want to go and just be talking about that willy-nilly. But in general, strong advice would be the more people that you talk to about your idea, the more quickly you're going to be able to refine it, the more quickly you're going to get better at communicating about your idea, and other people will see holes in your business model more quickly than you will. So the more feedback that you can get, the more often you can pitch it, the more often you can present your business model to people, the better. And then finally, doing multiple iterations. So a lean canvas should never just be done once and then left on a shelf. The idea is it should be a living, breathing document. So you go through, you test, find your biggest assumptions, test that, and then go back to it and update it, and then look for your next biggest assumption. And the other thing which I think is really useful to do if you're using the model properly is to use multiple versions of your lean canvas to look at your idea through different lenses. So to give you one example, we've talked about the difference between customers and users. You can do a big picture lean canvas where you cover both customers and users, but a sensible thing to do so that you start to do a bit of a deep dive into each of those groups is to do another version where you look solely at your customers and their problems and all of the related bits of your model, how you're going to reach them for your channels and so on and so forth. And then you do another version where you look specifically at your users. So you can do a deep dive to look at the problems which the patients who might be using a product, for example, might be facing. And that allows you to assess your idea through different lenses. And there's other ways that you can chop that. So you could change your problem statement and look at solving a slightly different problem with a similar solution, for example. So particularly when you're at that kind of early idea stage, doing multiple versions of the lean canvas and using that to assess your idea through those different lenses, I think could be super helpful. And then once you've got all of that out in front of you, so if your brain works like my brain works, it's much easier when you can see all those different models out in front of you to then be able to pick the one that you think is going to be most likely to be successful, right? Whereas if you try and weigh up all of those things in your head, you quickly can get lost. So encourage everyone, if you find it a useful exercise that we go into now, to repeat it and to use it to assess your model from different angles. And then once you have picked your model that you want to take forwards, to use it as a living, breathing document, right? So to update it each time you get a new piece of learning, and you refine it, and ultimately, like that one-page business plan, once you've refined it with all of those, the outputs of all of those experiments that you've done, that is your secret sauce, right? That is the success of your company, is if you can get a sustainable, viable, scalable business model. Okay, so in a second, I think we'll dive in and get you all to fill out your lean canvas, but appreciate I've dumped lots of information on you quite quickly. So I thought I'd pause for a second and see if anyone's got any burning questions before we get into it. If anything's been unclear or you're not sure about anything, if anyone's got any questions at all. Just getting the chat open here, bear with me.
Yeah, I don't think there's any questions at the moment, but feel free to raise your hand, anybody, or unmute if you have got a question.
Yeah, or dump it into the chat as well. Absolutely. Cool. Access to the recording, yes. So I think Jenny, you mentioned that, didn't you? So I think we'll get all of the recordings from this session and the other 3 sessions all uploaded. And do you want us to try it right away? Yes. So let's do that. Let's get stuck in and give this a go. So I don't know, Jenny, Lucy, if we sent out the lean canvas template ahead of this or not?
I've just shared it in the chat, so there's a PDF version or a Word version that everyone can download. Hopefully, if you have any problems, let me know. Yeah,
brilliant. And see how you go. If you're like me, you might want to go and just grab a pen and a bit of paper, and you can scribble out. I always find lean canvas easier to do handwritten personally, but if you're super quick at typing, then that's also okay. But yeah, if people want to run and grab a pen and a bit of paper and just scribble out the headings as we go along, that's completely fine. So what I'll do as well, let's get a timer going. So what we're going to do is we're going to whiz around the lean canvas, and we're going to spend 2 minutes on each box. And I'm going to ask you to fill out a couple of bullet points into each box as we go. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll, for many of you, have the first time have a holistic business and plan for your idea. So usually this is fairly intense, but very worthwhile exercise. So let's get stuck into it, right? So if I start a timer, and what I'd like everyone to start doing is start with the problem box. Right? So on your bit of paper, or if you're typing, that's fine. List out the top 3 problems that you'd like to try and solve. Let's see, the key problems that you're interested in innovating around. Every time I do this, I always think maybe we should get some like elevator music or something. and then manage to organize it. Yeah, so write down your top 3 problems, and then once you've got those written down at the bottom, write out the existing alternatives. So how are those problems solved today? What's the existing solutions that people use? About 30 seconds left. One thing you can try and do if you've got a little bit of time is maybe make a note of what you think the top problem is. And what's if you had to list just one of your top 3 problems, what would it be? What's the most important, most powerful problem that you're trying to solve? It's good to keep that in mind. Okay, so straight on to box 2. We'll move on to customer segments. So remember, there's 2 groups that we want to write about here. So your customers, who are the people who will pay for your solution, and then your users. No, some people they may be the same person. That's okay. But I suspect for many people, they may be different. So you can write down your customers, target customers, and your users. Yeah, and if you've managed to do that, again at the bottom of this section, you might want to write down your early adopters. So you think about your first 10 people who are going to purchase your product or use your product. Who are they, right? Where do they come from? What are their characteristics? Where are you going to find them? So yeah, think about early adopters as right in the bottom there. Okay, it's got 5 seconds. Okay, let's move on to box 3, which is the unique value proposition. So in 1 or 2 sentences, why should your customers and users care about you and what you do? What do you, what's your promise to them about how you're going to solve their problem, and why you're different from what's already out there? It can be a tricky box to fill out when you're first starting out, so don't worry too much about wordsmithing it. Putting a couple of bullet points down for now is fine if you're struggling. But if you're explaining in a sentence to people what you do, try and get that down. Jeez, if anyone could hear any funny noises, like cockapoos doing something, I don't know what she's doing. Hopefully the noise cancelling is working. I was actually trying to dig a hole through the stairs at the moment. Okay, so let's wrap up this section and we move straight on to solution. So the bit that every innovator loves, but try and keep it laser focused. So look at your problem box. In order to solve those problems for your customers, what are the top 1 to 3 things that your solution needs to do? What are the key features that if you don't have them, then you're not going to solve the problem? I can give you the other tip with this box is to look back at what you wrote down for your existing alternatives. So how is your solution going to be faster, better, cheaper, more effective, or different from those existing alternatives? Because that's going to be what's going to cause your customers to switch from the existing alternative to your new way, right? Your promise of a better solution. So once you've got your 3 things listed down, think about what's going to make your solution different and better from what's already out there. Hey, so on we go. Apologies, I know it's a bit relentless, but on to channels. So how are you going to go and find your customers, right? So this could be inbound things like your website and online marketing. Could be outbound stuff. So you're going to do some cold calling and go and find people. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you could put in here. But how are you going to reach your customers? And in particular, we talked about early adopters in the customer box. How are you going to go and communicate to those early adopters? Who you can think about long-term doing big fancy TV ads or whatever it might be. But how are you going to find your first 10 people? Where do they hang out? How are you going to communicate to them? 15 seconds or so. So finish up your thoughts in this one. Great. So over halfway now, and 4 boxes left. Let's look at revenue streams. So how are you going to make money from your product? Or if you're not for profit, how are you going to find some sustainable funding, which is going to allow you to do what you want to do, right? So a bunch of stuff which could go in here. Maybe you've got a subscription model, maybe you've got like a one-time purchase, or like a freemium model where you give a free version out and then you start charging for premium features. Sometimes you want to think more creatively, so maybe it's getting an industry partner like a pharma or a company or a medical device company who's going to fund your development, so you can give it away free to healthcare providers. But yeah, it could be grant funding, it could be raising capital, raising investment. How are you going to get the money in to do what you need to do? And again, it can be tricky when you're at an early stage to think really long term. And so one thing you might want to do is think about, well, what money do you need to build for your MVP, and how are you going to get that money, right? Which is often a different question to how are you going to fund things long term. Make sure you've got what your immediate next steps would be. How are you going to get in that first 10K or 20K or whatever it is you need to get going? Hey, so straight into cost structures now. So what are the headline costs that's going to take to deliver your product? That could be staffing, that can be development costs, that can be having an office, distribution costs, so your how much it costs to serve all of your customers, your marketing spend, how much you can spend on that. Again, can be tricky when you're at an early stage. So if you're struggling, I'd recommend thinking about that initial next step. What's it going to cost to build your MVP, your first version of a product, and go out there and test that? So you can start with the near term and then maybe start thinking after that about some more long-term things. What are at least the big buckets of costs that you're going to have to think about in terms of people and technology and other things? Twenty seconds left. You still got a bit of time. Look back at your revenue streams. Do you have stuff written in your revenue streams which are going to cover your costs? Because if not, then that's a worry. So you might need to think about that. Okay, so almost there now. 2 boxes left. Key metrics. So what are the key numbers that are going to tell you if you're going in the right direction? So again, a good way to think about this is to think about that problem to solution fit if you're at an early stage. So what are the key things that are going to tell you if your solution is really solving the problem? How do you validate that? As you get out into later stages, you think about product market fit, the key numbers may be more about how many customers are you able to acquire in lead generation, and then converting those leads into paying customers. But really important to think about what are the most important numbers that you're going to be looking at, particularly, and again, going to focus it on the near term. When you run those first experiments, what are the numbers that you would look at to tell you whether your experiment's been a success or a failure? About 30 seconds left. And one last thing I'll add on this box is beware the trap of vanity metrics. And vanity metric is numbers which look good, but actually don't translate to meaningful progress. So an example would be, I'm getting 10,000 unique visitors to my website every day, but only one of those is converting into a paying customer. Well, what do you do? You've got 10,000 unique visitors, that's great, but they're not actually buying anything from you, then it's not that valuable. Okay. So last but definitely not least is the unfair advantage box. So what stops your product from being copied easily or bought by you know, a competitor? So things that you can put in here, that could be your team, right? If you've got unique skills and you've got some of the best people in the world working on your project, that's great. You think about your advisory board. Did you get you know, world-renowned specialists and experts being part of your company, being part of your board? Is there any IP that you're able to protect? Can often be tricky, but depending on what your innovation is, there may be, you know, a patent, there may be some ability to do copyright or trademark. Can be difficult, but maybe something you could put in there. But yeah, what's going to stop you know, one of the big tech companies, for example, just coming in, eating your lunch? What have you got that's defensible? And to be clear, maybe not something that you have now as well. If you're at an early stage, it can be what you aspirational things that you want to put in place. So we want to get the world leading you know, professor in this specialty to be part of our advisory board. We can put down things which you're going to work towards in there as well. There we go. So let's shut up the timer. We're hopefully at the end, and hopefully everyone's got a one-page business plan in front of them. Usually, every time I've done that with Tony Young and made him suffer through it, he tells me that it makes his head hurt because it's quite intense. So if that's the case for you, then you're not alone. I appreciate the first time that you're doing it can be unfamiliar, and you use up a lot of cognitive bandwidth, but hopefully a really useful exercise, and will have provoked some questions, some thoughts about stuff that you thought you knew, but maybe there was a gap which you hadn't quite spotted. And what I'll do, we'll take some questions in a second, and really happy to take any questions about anything on the Lean Canvas, also anything about my background or any just problems that you guys are facing, and you know, anything that I can help with, we can chat about. But before we do that, I'll just give you again this one slide. So you've got your Lean Canvas in front of you. What next, right? Where do you go with that? So hopefully you've got some thoughts down about your customer problem. You've designed a potential solution in your mind, and you've got your business model. I'd encourage each of you to think about those different iterations of it, right? So maybe do another lean canvas to explore your users, another lean canvas to explore your customers. Maybe you want to dive into a slightly different type of problem, which may then open up a different customer segment that you could go after. So think about doing multiple versions of your lean canvas. Once you've done that, have a look at them and work out which one of those models you think is your gut tells you is the most viable and the one that you want to take forward and start just sort of experimenting on. Then you can look at it and try and work out where is your biggest risk. And so Eric Ries, in his book, The Lean Startup, talks about your leap of faith assumptions. Where are your assumptions that you've made in your business model that if they're wrong, your business isn't going to work? So, you know, usually that's when you're starting out in the problem to solution area, right? So have you understood the problem? Do you know who your customers are? And have you understood what your solution needs to be in order to solve that problem? So usually your biggest risk is going to be in and around those boxes somewhere. Once you've worked that, what's the simplest thing that you can do in order to test that assumption? So that could be building a prototype product. In many cases, when you're at an early stage, it could be even more simple than that, right? It could be putting a slide deck together and going and presenting that slide deck to some potential customers and getting their feedback. It could be going and doing some semi-structured interviews with people and trying to learn and understand more about the problem and you know, get their lived experience so you understand it better. But yeah, look at your model, go and do the simplest thing you can do to test with some real people, analyze that feedback, and then come back to the drawing board again, right? And then make that decision. Is it still looking viable? Do you want to go and test your next riskiest assumption? Do you need to pivot perhaps to one of your other business models? Or have you got enough validation from those exercises that you're ready to really start investing time, money, and effort into building your product and you know, building a genuine minimum viable product that you take out there and try and sell? So hopefully that's given you some context and some food for thought. I'll put these up on the screen. These are some of my favorite books, which I think are really useful. Depending on what stage you're at, I'd recommend everyone reads The Lean Startup. Really great book, really good starting point. If you're then interested in how to put that into action, running lean is a great next step, and it will walk you through that lean canvas and then how to use it. If you're a bit later on and you started to build your product, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products is amazing for how you build sticky products that people want to keep on using. And then if you're a bit later still and you're managing development teams, getting skilled up in Agile, I think super important. And if you're building an organization, The Ultimate Sales Machine is great. Great book. It's helped me a lot on my journey. So I'll leave you with this quote and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So there's a lot, there's a lot to take in. There's a lot of lessons to learn. I think one of the most important lessons, one of the things I've seen healthcare innovators struggle with is the fear of failure, right? We're a risk-averse bunch in general, you know, healthcare professionals, clinicians. But it's okay to fail. That's where you get your biggest learning. The biggest problem I see is people who, when they're scared to fail, don't go out there and try things, don't go out there and experiment, don't go out there and speak to people. So I'd encourage you to take your business model that you've just written out and then go out there and start talking to people about it. Go out there and trying to work out what's the simplest thing that you can do to start validating some of your assumptions. I say usually, often, that's going out and talking to people, right? Going and doing some interviews with some potential customers, going and understanding their situation better. And with that, I think that's enough with the slides. So I'll stop the screen share and open the floor. I'd like to take any questions. So feel free to stick your hand up. We can have a chat if anyone wants to put their hand up. We're not scary. And I'm sure Tamsin and others, if you've got any questions for them as well, I'm sure they'll be happy to chime in too. Or if you're less less sociable, want to drop a question into the chat, happy to take them there as well.
There is a question from Amin in the chat. I'm not sure, Amin, if you'd like to read it out. If not, I can read it here. So they have a quick question about putting the CEP vision into practice. I'm keen to build and lead an innovation project within my trust, but I've been told that any software development should come from a third party. If the trust itself would be the client, how does this work in practice? Would this create a conflict of interest, and how is this usually managed?
Yeah, so I can certainly speak to that. I mean, there's and full disclosure, we're talking about conflicts of interest. My day job is working for a consultancy, and one of the things we do is act as a third-party software development company. So we've got some experience in doing that. Usually it's okay. I think depending on if it's a innovation project which you're doing just on behalf of the trust, I think that's fine. If you've got aspirations of then taking that product and going and selling it elsewhere, you get into the realms of IP, and it starts to become a little bit more complicated. So probably depends a little bit on the specifics. But certainly there's plenty of companies like ours who often work with and for NHS trusts to do bespoke software development. So it's usually definitely manageable. And then we've got a couple of hands up. Karen, I think your hand is up first if you want to go.
Hi, I'm a respiratory nurse, and I've developed a digital program similar, well, not quite similar to my COPD, my asthma. But so for the unique value proposition, it is very, that confuses us because I don't know, my program's different to my COPD, and I wondered what do you think their value proposition would be, preventing people like me coming along, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And again, should watch my words, having being an ex-employee of IM Health, and got my own view of their strengths and limitations. But I think rather than focusing on what they are doing, I would encourage you to focus on what you are doing. And the key thing is, what can you communicate to people who get bombarded with so much information these days, right? Which makes them, they've got a young asthmatic patient who you want to use your solution. Why should they care, right? Why should they care about this thing? And one of the things I commonly see in healthcare innovation is we can end up being quite dry. We can end up being quite boring. And say that quietly. But we could talk about the clinical benefits of this or the outputs of that. That's okay if you're speaking to clinicians, right? We get it. But if you're speaking to an end user, if you're speaking to a patient, what is the material difference that you are going to make in their lives, right? And what are they going to be able to do after using your product that they couldn't do before, right? And if you look at big multi-billion dollar international corporations, what do they sell, right? What's the tagline of like a McDonald's or a Diet Coke or whoever it is? Like, buy happiness, or like feel like this, or whatever. And it's selling the benefits that they're going to see. It's selling the feelings that they're going to get. It's selling the material difference that you're going to make in their lives. So I'd encourage you to think about, what is your promise that you're going to make to your end user, to your patient, to your asthmatic patient, right? Whoever it is, which is going to be compelling enough to get them to spend their time or money and to engage with your solution. And yeah, certainly go around, right? So speak too much out of turn, but if you go and have a look at my Health's website, you can have a look on there, and you can look at their wording. You can look at what promise they are making, and think about how are you going to promise something different and better to that.
Thank you.
Is that useful, Karen? Does that help?
Yeah, very, very useful. Thank you.
Cool. Who was next? Is it Becky?
Just a quick question really about ethics. So where does this innovation sit with medical ethics when you are asking for for users, NHS users, or people out, public people, etc. I'm a midwife by background. I'm currently a senior midwifery lecturer, and one of my thoughts is around hypnosis. And I know there's lots of apps and things out there, but I haven't seen any that are sort of led by midwives. And that's sort of like my USP about that, and courses around antenatal education. So that's my thoughts. But where do we sit from an ethical point of view with that?
Yeah, I mean, Tamsin, I might bring you in for thoughts on this, but I'll give my 2 pence first. So I think depends what you're doing and what stage you're at. I think often when you're at quite an early stage, you want to do quite a lot of information gathering, and I think you can do that quite easily because you're not proposing a novel intervention. You're instead trying to understand people's lived experience, and so you can do that with relatively little concerns about research ethics or other things, right? When you're doing that first information gathering, as your innovation progresses and you're starting to actually want to go out there and test things, then increasingly you're going to need to start engaging with appropriate research ethics. I mean, one thing which I've seen people do and works reasonably well, depending on what it is, what your innovation actually is things like engaging with clinical audit and doing kind of quality improvement initiatives. I've seen that be a route which people have used reasonably successfully. And that's not a full research ethics approval, but it is a way to operate, in a safe and appropriate level of governance for many innovations. Obviously, it's different if you're making like a medical device, which you're trying to, an implantable device into somebody or something else. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But there's often ways and means. So I think very early stage, doing information gathering, you've probably got quite a lot of freedom to operate there, as long as you're upfront and honest about what it is that you're talking about and planning to do. As you then get further along your journey, you'll increasingly have to engage, I would say. Tamsin, you've obviously got loads of experience here. I don't know if you'd add.
Yeah, I think Harry, you said it all, but Becky, I think you're right that there is some blurring between the boundaries, and as healthcare professionals we know about ethics and we want to get it right, and then when I was doing research, then they were like, oh, have you done PPI or PPIE they call it, which is patient and public involvement and engagement, and then you're like, oh right, so you don't need ethics for that, but you do need ethics for that. So getting a user group or doing PPI, patient and public involvement, is something that is a pre-research, and anything to do with research, they want to see that you've done that so that your research is de-risked. But you're quite right that there is something that makes you kind of question some of that. I think the bit that makes it clearer or makes you feel better about the process is that your research department, you can kind of, and as Harry quite rightly pointed out, some of the things you can do is audit, quality improvement, PPI or PPIE, and if you just inform your research department, if you're working within an organisation, then that is sometimes enough, because they will put that down and you've sort of got that backup then. But it is, you do need to then, as you go on to proper research, even if it's a small sample group, then they want to see that you've done that. You've had the user engagement, you've got the patient voice, you've got quotes from the patients, and you're absolutely right, it overlaps with some of the research you're doing. But so it does feel a little bit blurry to us, a little bit, especially when you're sort of being a purist about it all. But I think that there is a point where people are expecting you to have had those conversations, to understand your need and form a good business case / piece of research before you go on. And I think sometimes you can it's not get away with, you can inform your research department that I'm going to do some PPI, and if you're lucky they might even say, oh, we've got a little pot of funding of £100 for people doing PPI work, and then you might even be able to do it. I know that people have to be careful about how much they want to disclose to their hospital, depending on who owns the IP and whether you're sharing the IP with your organisation, which is a different conversation. But so just knowing where you sit with your intellectual property depends on whether you're going to use some of their department or their work, but going ahead and doing a little PPI group, user group, patient involvement group, patient voice group is fine. And you kind of need to do it. You're quite right. It's a little bit grey in the middle.
Yeah, and it's like all of these things, isn't it? When you're starting out, you just want to get it right.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to tread on toes and this sort of thing. So it's sort of, but that's very, very helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing, I think I'd probably encourage you to think beyond your own organisation as well, right? So maybe it's engaging with a charity or something who might have connections to patients suffering from a particular condition or whatever it may be relevant for you. But thinking a bit out of your own existing patch may be worthwhile. The other thing which I definitely again try and reinforce is don't forget about your customers. Yeah. If you have an aspiration to get a hospital or an ICB or whatever it is to the NHS to purchase your product, make sure that you're thinking about your customer stakeholders and getting good early engagement and validation with them, because if you're missing that part of your business model, you invest a lot of time engaging with your end users, which is also really important. But if you only do one or the other, then you're probably missing a big chunk of your model.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Becky. And then is it Anne? Anne?
Yes, hi, thank you. So my question is, so I'm an orthopedic registrar, and I think I applied to the clinical entrepreneur program earlier this year, but I didn't quite make it. But I went and piloted my idea anyways, and so it's not quite a product; it's more like a new service model. And I tried it on 50 patients, and initially my aim was that the new service model would bring down cost, and my customer would be the finance department of NHS Trust. But what I found out after the pilot was that it didn't necessarily make it cheaper, but patients absolutely loved it because they are very satisfied, and it aligns with a couple of the other NHS 10-year plan goals, like CO2 emission and keeping people out of hospital. So would you, from your experience, and so I'll be interested in hearing from anyone as well, from your experience working with Trust senior leadership, do you think I should focus on either making the service cheaper, so to really double down on cost, or you think it is worth still going with an alternative value proposition of patient satisfaction, the CO2 emission, keeping people out of hospital? Which way I'm kind of trying to think about the next step to improve, to propose my value for this innovation, but just not quite sure which way is the better approach.
Yeah, right. Nice, easy question. I think, without knowing all of the specifics, the thing which pops into my mind, and I talked about it a little bit around, thinking about different customer segments, perhaps potentially having some slightly different iterations of your lean canvas model. If you've got something which is greatly improving patient satisfaction, who is a likely customer for that? Well, private sector may be an interesting starting point for you. So maybe your early adopters could be private clinics who maybe have got a little bit more disposable revenue than NHS Trust. Maybe that gives you the facility to really build something, get it in use, get it better validated, increase your level of evidence, at which point it becomes easier to then come back to the NHS, because you've now got a compelling health economic proposition. For example, we can confidently reduce readmission rates, right? And we can stack up a health economic case against that and therefore get more traction. So I would be thinking about that. I'd also be thinking about, there's another iteration on that, perhaps one of the medical device companies, right? So Stryker or whoever, would they be interested in potentially funding and sponsoring this? They like to do above brand, they like to call it, solutions, right? They like to do things which make them look good to clinicians and patients. So could there be an industry partner who might be interested in adopting this and backing it and taking it to the next stage? So that's definitely something that I would think about. The question around cost is an interesting one. If you can reduce cost without compromising quality and still deliver high patient satisfaction, well, that sounds like a good thing to do, right? If you can make your model more efficient and cheaper and therefore easier to buy, or improve your margins, then of course not a great thing to do. I would worry about trying hard to go and sell to lots of NHS organisations on the basis of purely patient experience alone, right? And that's not to say that people don't care about that, but we know that the NHS is got real financial pressures, right? So not being able to demonstrate, and it sounds like you're probably too early to demonstrate a really robust health economic case, or really significant evidence about the long-term impact of this. I imagine that's going to be hard for you to get the right time and attention, right? Because we all know that there's big challenges in the system. So I think I would be looking at doors which open doors to push on, if that makes sense. And I suspect if you've got good early validation and good early traction around patient experience, then one of those two options which I suggested might be the avenue which I would pursue if I was you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, answer the question. Thank you.
Cool. And then is it Faisal?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Perfect. Well, good evening, everyone, and I appreciate the fantastic presentation, Dr. Harry. I did join in a bit late, so I do apologize if I ask this question, which might be not relevant, but I devised the lean plan you gave for a AI recruitment company. Will that really qualify or not really?
Qualify what in terms of potential application to the program?
Yeah, because everyone so far they've been speaking about a product, and this is more of a service-based idea. So I just
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure Polly and Tamsin and others might have a view, but certainly I've seen all sorts of things on the clinical entrepreneur program. So it can be a product, it can be a piece of hardware, right? A real medical device, it could be software as a medical device, it could be a service, it could be a charity, it can be an intrapreneur idea, where someone's just trying to innovate within their own organization. So it can be almost anything. So yeah, I think we'd want, of course, with it being an NHS program, that there's potential benefit to the NHS from the innovation. I think that's the one of the markers that we'd be looking for. But the NHS needs to do recruitment, so I wouldn't have thought there'd be a big issue there necessarily.
Well, I have two questions, if I may.
Sure.
I did a bit of homework prior to joining the webinar, despite being late, but I Googled many hospitals, and one that stood out to me was NHS Bradford. So with all hospitals, if you Google their 2025 or 2030 plan in terms of digitalizing their, for example, organization/staff or the building they're currently in, so on and so forth. They have a plan. So my background, by the way, is in computational neuroscience. I'm more of a mature student, but I have a decade of experience in sales. So I've done sales in events, in technology, and very recently in AI. So what I've seen during my studies is that there is a lack of expertise when it comes to artificial intelligence, whether it's statistics, whether it's genomic data sequencing, so on and so forth. So looking at all these hospitals and the data they have put out there, I'm sure you're probably aware a few days ago, the government put out an 80-page document in terms of investing in the life sciences as well. And AstraZeneca, for example, are investing 50 billion, right, in America with a focus on AI in terms of drug discovery and engineering. So few things started to click in my mind. So in terms of what I like to ask, number one, is how can a recruitment company that is now focusing on what one would term as next gen researchers, right, who have experience in machine learning, gen AI, and they understand the various trends when it comes to drug discovery and understanding patient data in a quicker, in a short amount of time, rather than going through the usual days and weeks, for example. So number one is how to connect academia with seasoned professionals and therefore companies. This is question number one. Question number two is in terms of meeting deadlines, because I have liaised with my professors when I was studying at Birkbeck and also at UCL. One of the biggest pain points for them is when they're looking to recruit postdoc students in their lab, for example, or if they're working with other wearable technology companies, the biggest pain point for them is meeting deadlines and timelines. So how do I complement my services with their timelines? What's the sort of strategy there? So
interesting. No, I get the sense we could have longer conversation about both of those things. I think at a high level, the first part of your question, I guess it's the age-old marketplace problem is really what you're describing, right? You need to be able to manage both supply and demand. In your case, supply being candidates and demand being companies who want to fulfill those. Go back to what I was saying with the lean canvas. I'd recommend doing one iteration where you're looking at the supply side and one iteration where you're looking at the demand side. And then what I'd be wanting to do is to do a deep dive into both of those. So thinking about the demand side, right? So your things, you've just given an example of one of the problems which they face, right? Which is tight turnaround times or the need to be able to get people in quite quickly. Well, there you go. That starts, you can already start seeing how that maps out. So what are the key features of your solution that you're going to need in order to be able to solve that? What are your key metrics that you're going to need to look at? But then you need to repeat that and do that for the supply side as well, right? So go out and speaking to some of these postdocs. What are their challenges? What are the things that they care about in the companies which they are looking for? What are their existing alternatives? Where are they going in order to find these potential roles? And what are the problems with those existing alternatives? So there's a whole bunch of exploration that you're going to need to do on both sides. And I think, again, we could talk at greater length about this, but I suspect with your background, Faisal, and I don't want to make too many big assumptions, but there's a risk of you falling into the classic innovators trap, which is to immediately start thinking about your solution and immediately starting to think about your solution in terms of the technology, right? I can tell you've obviously got a strong background in AI and other things, but the simple answer when you're first getting going, maybe something like a little concierge MVP, which is literally you doing the job of the technology and keeping a spreadsheet of people, postdocs that you've worked with and companies, so you know they might be going to, and actually really getting lived experience of what that journey looks like in terms of placing those people into these companies, because that'll help you understand both sides. But that's maybe not answering all of your questions, but maybe some of your questions. Does that help? as a steer of where to focus initially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's extremely helpful, especially key matrix. I think is often overlooked. It's a very powerful tool. I like to use a framework with almost everything I do. It's called AMP, if I may share. So very quickly, A is your approach, M is method, the other M is methodology, P is procedure, and T is technique. So T is essentially where you're measuring, in a sense, what has worked, what hasn't worked, could work, and is it worth testing what could work, and the time and energy it takes into that. So no, that's extremely useful. Would it be appropriate if I connect with you on LinkedIn as well?
Sure. Yeah. There's only one person on there with such a silly name, so you'll find me.
Yeah. It's not silly name. Okay, awesome. So yeah, that's all my questions, and yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Great to connect. And I did spot another question somewhere in the chat, which I was going to answer.
We have got a few, if that's okay, just before we finish. This might be a question more, well, to sort of seek legal advice, but Una has just asked, how do you protect an idea or potentially patent an idea? I'm not sure if you or Tamsin would like to respond.
Sure. Big question. Speak to an IP lawyer always. I think it has to be part of the answer. So I'm definitely not an IP lawyer, but I can tell you from a little bit of my own experience, and Tamsin, feel free to chip in afterwards. But depends a lot on what the idea is, right? Patents can be great in the right context and in the right setting, but you need to have something which is genuinely patentable, right? In general, that means that you need to have something very novel, right? Which is not being done in another setting. You'll see people, particularly with hardware type devices, often there's something patentable about that, which is, using a particular technology in a particular setting and in a particular way, which you can defend with a patent. When it comes, depending on what it is, your solution is, if it's software or something, it can often be very difficult to patent. And then you're into the realms of things like copyright. But I think that's extraordinarily difficult, really, if I'm being honest, in software. You could copyright the code, but then if somebody just does some minor changes to the code, then they can evade it. So that can be a real genuine challenge. And then trademark is the other big bucket. And trademarks are great, but they only really protect your brand. So if you don't have much of a brand and much of a following, and your logo and other things isn't known, then registered trademark has limited utility. It's a bit of a waffly answer. It depends a lot on what it is. If you do think that you've maybe got something patentable, then getting early advice from an IP lawyer is definitely really important. If it is a piece of software or other things, I say, it could be much more challenging to do. But yeah, Tamsin, I don't know if you've got anything.
Not much to add to that, but it's sometimes worth, before you're doing that, to go back to your employment contract and look at what the IP clause is in your employment contract, and that might help a little bit, because you probably need to think about that too. But Harry's completely right. You think of your IP almost like a bucket, and in that is going to be not just patents, but trademarks, copyrights, and maybe some of the research you've done. There's certain things that you can sort of collect that is valuable to other people. Patent is one of those things. You probably, and as Harry says, it's worth speaking to an IP lawyer about that. They will often give you the first hour for free and talk you through it before then working out if you actually need an IP lawyer. And they're very good at knowing what is patentable.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you both. There's another question from Jonathan, which I'll just read out. It says, in terms of a revenue stream, I can see how people might pay for the product I'm thinking of, but in order to be worth buying, it needs to have developed momentum. At the start, there's a risk it might need to be free at the first point and encourage early adopters and the community to engage. How do you plan for a product that might not make money at the start?
Yeah, really interesting question. And again, it depends so much on specifics. So I'll speak kind of high level generalities. But depends a lot on what you're doing. If you can, they call it bootstrapping. If you can manage to get your product to a stage where people can start using it, and you can do that because you've got your own coding expertise, or maybe you've got a co-founder or somebody that you can work with who's willing to do things for sweat equity, right? And so maybe they get a percentage of the company, or a percentage of the profits of the company, or something. Maybe you can strike up a deal with somebody who can help you get your product to a certain stage. The other thing is to look at other funding sources. So depending again on what the product is and how big the appeal is, you can do things like grant funding, which can be a bit soul destroying. I'll be honest, we've all written a lot of grants that are highly competitive. They take a long time, but they're there, right? And then that can be a way to get some money in the door, which allows you to get your product to a stage, right? So grants, so definitely look at things like crowdfunding, another option, early investment from angels, angel investors, or doing an SEIS or an EIS round. You can Google those terms. I won't go into them now. So there could be some ways to get some money in. The other thing is, can you test key concepts of your idea without necessarily building out your full product? So I mentioned to Faisal the potential of doing like a concierge MVP. Maybe another way to validate the model which you're trying to do without actually building any technology, right? Which is you literally interposing yourself and doing what the technology might do. You could also call it a Wizard of Oz MVP and some other things. So behind the scenes, you're pulling all the levers, but to the end user, it looks like the technology is doing everything. So maybe there's some options in there. The other thing which you can look at is potentially cobbling together other existing solutions. So that could be spreadsheets or Google Forms or something else, right? And putting together a bit of a cobbled together solution which allows you to again test and validate some of your ideas and get some of that early initial traction. So there's definitely creative ways out there that you can generate early traction, and you can get some good strong validation behind your model before you've got getting revenue. But the other thing, final point, is don't undersell yourself, right? A lot of entrepreneurs get embarrassed because they feel that their product isn't ready, so therefore they're going to give it away for free. True validation comes when someone dips their hand in their pocket and pays for your product, right? In many cases. So getting some of your early adopters, and you find true early adopters who really genuinely care about the problem and are genuinely looking for a new solution because they're so fed up and pissed off with the existing alternatives which aren't meeting their needs. Be surprised at what those people would be willing to do and to engage with. Challenging yourself to make sure that you're not taking the path of least resistance, and that's why you're choosing to give away your product for free. And in fact, actually, maybe you need to start thinking about charging earlier than you initially thought of. Maybe, again, everything depends on specifics, right? But you should definitely be having that question in your own mind. Why am I giving this away for free? And there's better be a strong, good answer to that. That's helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Harry. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. I think all the ones that were in the chat have been covered. So we will bring it to a close. So yeah, huge thank you, Harry, for delivering that session. And thank you to the team as well for your input. Our next session will be on Thursday. So it's this week. On Thursday the 24th, and it will focus on pitching and sort of articulating your innovative ideas. So hopefully we will see many of you there. But yes, thank you all very much for joining, and hope you have a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.